Hey guys, this is Lori with LM's Crafty Creations, and I am here with a new tutorial for you. This one is my Graphic 45 Winter Wonderland tutorial, and this one takes quite a lot of paper, so I'm just going to warn you ahead of time because it was originally designed as my 6x6 Doodlebug Booze and Brews mini album, and I decided to redo it into an 8x8 album, and yeah, that is not conducive to saving on paper when you do it that way. Because the Doodlebug album I kind of made to save paper, and when you just make an album larger, it doesn't work that way. So, but it's really cute. I think you're really going to like it, even though it takes a bunch of paper. So let's start with base pages. So, base pages, you need 6 pieces at 7.5 by 7.5, and then 6 pieces at 7.5 by 8.5. Score on the 8.5 inch side at 1/2 inch on each end. Go ahead and fold on your score lines and burnish. And I've already put together 5 of my base pages, so I'm just going to put one together with you guys. Same construction as always, it's just a pocket page. We're just going to add this page to the 7.5 by 7.5 inch page. I always burnish my glue, and I always glue one side down at a time. This album has quite a few flips and flaps in it, but I think the construction will go fairly quickly. I've already pre-cut and scored all of my pieces, but I'll go through the measurements with you as we go. And as always, the measurements will be in the description at the bottom of the video. Okay, so there is our pocket page. So for the front, the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to say, we're going to do page 1 front and then page 1 back, and that's how it's also listed in the measurements below. So hopefully that's not confusing. So for the front of page 1, you're going to need 2 pieces at 6.5 by 7.5, and you're going to score on the 6.5 inch side of each piece at 1/2 inch. Then you're going to need, for your corner pocket, you're going to need to cut a piece at 6.5 by 6.5 inches, and you're going to want to score on all 4 sides of this piece at 1/2 inch on each end. So let's start with our 2 flaps. So I'm going to take one flap and I'm going to miter the corners where I've scored. And I'm actually going to do that on both of them. Okay. And I'm going to fold on my score lines and burnish. For each one. And I'm going to put glue on the inside here of this flap. And stick it in here on the inside of the base page. First one goes on the left and the second one goes on the right, or whichever order you prefer to do it in. It doesn't matter. So this one's you're gonna put the glue in the same place and stick it on the other side. Okay. Make sure you don't go over that score line and just burnish that down. So now we have 2 flaps. For some reason, mine are showing to be a little uneven on this, probably because I didn't burnish correctly. Just gonna fix that. Okay, so open your two flaps up, and for your 6.5 by 6.5 piece, we're actually going to need to cut it right down the middle on the diagonal. So let me move all of my stuff out of the way and get my trimmer. And I'm just going to put this and line this up with my cutting lines. Whoops. And cut it down the middle, just like that. Now, I'm going to miter this corner where my score lines meet, just like that. I'm going to fold on the score lines and burnish. And then I'm going to cut off the little wings of the pocket. And I'm going to do the same to the other piece. Oops. Now I'm going to line these pockets up at the bottom of each of these flaps here. So I'm going to add my glue to the outside of the hinge. I'm going to stick it down. Now when I mat these pockets, I cut my pattern paper to 5 1/4 by 5 1/4. And then I just cut it diagonally, just like I did the pockets. So it's really easy. On my Graphic 45 album, I did not use a magnet on this page, but you certainly can. It just depends on the paper and whether or not it lays flat for you. My black paper, the black paper that I use, tends to lay flatter than the craft paper that I use. So on the craft cardstock, I may have to use a magnet. Just depends. And they just close, just like that. Or you could use a swing tab here. And then on the front cover of mine, you can either just put a single cut apart, or you could do a cut apart booklet like I did. If you want to do the booklet, cut the booklet to 6 1/4 by 8 1/2 to do the booklet on the front. Okay, so there's the front of page 1 is done. Let's move on to the back of page 1. Make sure I got it in the right direction. And the back of page 1 is, we're going to start off with a pocket on the bottom, and the pocket is cut to 5 inches by 8 1/2 inches. You're going to score on the 5-inch side at 1/2 inch and on the 8 1/2 inch side at 1/2 inch on each end, and then miter your corners. Fold on your score lines and burnish. Just give it a quick test to make sure my measurements were accurate, and they are. So I'm going to go ahead, add my glue, and I'm going to stick it down. Then we're going to add a top flap at 6 1/2 by 7 1/2. Score on the 7 1/2 inch side at 1/2 inch. fold on your score line and burnish. And you're going to add this. I'm going to turn my page upside down, and I'm going to add it directly on the top and centering it as much as possible. Okay, so this is a top flap. And it just lifts up like this. Now on top of the flap, I also did a pocket. You're going to cut this to 7.5 inches by 5 inches. Score on the 7.5 inch side at 1/2 inch on each end, and on the 5 inch side at 1/2 inch. Miter your corners, and then fold on your score lines and burnish. And go ahead and just add this to the bottom of this flap here. Okay. Okay, so now the front and back of page 1 is complete, so go ahead and set that to the side. And let's get another base page and start with the front of page 2, which is really simple. It's just a large pocket. Cut this pocket to 6.5 inches by 8.5 inches. Score on the 8.5 inch side at 1/2 inch on each end, and then on the 6.5 inch side at 1/2 inch. Miter your corners, and then fold on your score lines and burnish. And this is just going to be added directly to the bottom of the base page. Make sure you have your openings on the sides. And just burnish those down. Sorry if you can hear my table squeaking. I guess it needs some WD-40, huh? That's it for that page. So flip it over. Now we're going to do the back. And the back of it is, we're going to have several flaps on this one. So we're going to start with the largest flap. That's cut to 7.5 inches by 8 inches. Score on the 8 inch side at 1/2 inch. Fold on your score line and burnish. And just add it right directly to the top of the page. Now if you want to add a decorative border to this one, you can. I did a Martha Stewart punch for mine. But you can choose to do whatever you like. Now flip this page up, and let's go ahead and add this one has 2 flaps that are kind of, one is at the top of the page and one is at the bottom of the page on the opposite side. So these 2 flaps are cut at 5 3/4 by 6 1/4. Score on the 5 3/4 inch side at 1/2 inch. Fold on your score line and burnish for each page. For the first page, you're going to add it on the left-hand side on the top. Just make sure you stay away from the score line for that top flap just a little bit. So come down just enough just to make sure your page closes nicely. So I'm just going to come down about 1/8 of an inch and make sure that, because once you get your pattern paper added, it tends to be a little bit thicker, and sometimes it'll catch on that flap right there when you're trying to close it. Yes, I learned that the hard way. The other flap you'll add on the right hand side, and you'll do it, just go ahead and do it directly at the bottom if you like. I'm going to do mine just a little bit up from the bottom, about another 1/8 of an inch, just like I did the other one, just to stay consistent. So that's it for the inside. So fold these two flaps in and then the top flap down, and we're going to add yet another flap on the top of this flap. This one's cut to 6.5 inches by 6.5 inches. Score on one of the 6.5 inch sides at 1/2 inch. Fold on your score line and burnish. And then I'm going to flip mine over because it's easier for me to line it up that way. You're just going to add it to the center on the top of the page. And that's it. Okay. So you have 2 flaps and then 2 interior flaps on this one. So this page 2 is done. Let's move on to page 3. Moving right along, get another base page. And the front of page 3, I've got my other pages that I've already made referencing over here to the side, so I knew what I'm doing. This one is a flap and a pocket. So let's do the pocket first. So cut one pocket at 8.5 inches by 5 inches, score on the 5 inch side at 1/2 inch and on the 8.5 inch side at 1/2 inch on each end. Miter your corners. And fold on your score lines and burnish. And just add it directly to the bottom of the page. Just adding my glue. I'm just going to set it right down there at the bottom. Okay, now I'm going to add a large flap on the right hand side, so I'm going to miter my corners. This flap is cut to 6.5 inches by 7.5 inches. Score on the 6.5 inch side at 1/2 inch. Fold on your score line and burnish. And then put the glue on the interior of your flap. And stick it in on the right hand side. And fold it over. And I did use a magnet on this page to keep this flap down. And then I also cut this piece too to show you that you can do another one of those corner pockets like we did on page 1. You just cut it to 6.5 inches by 6.5 inches and you score on all 4 sides at 1/2 inch. And then you just cut it on the diagonal. And if you choose, you can add it right here. In the original Doodlebug tutorial, I added that pocket there, but I kind of liked it left off on the G45 one, so I'm just going to leave it off. So, I'm going to put this to the side. Turn the page over, and for the back of page 3, we're going to do another pocket and a flap. So cut your pocket to 4.5 inches by 8.5 inches. Score on the 4.5 inch side at 1/2 inch, and then on the 8.5 inch side at 1/2 inch on each end. And miter your corners. And fold on your score lines and burnish. And just add this directly to the bottom of the base page. And then the other flap is cut to 6.5 inches by 6 inches. And then you score on the 6.5 inch side at 1/2 inch. Fold on your score line and burnish. Let's see, page 3 back. Is that correct? Page 3. Yeah, that is right. I want to make sure I told you to score on the right side of the flap. Go ahead and add your glue. And I've turned my page upside down because it's easier for me to line it up. Just line it up right there at the top. Stick it down. Okay. And page 3 is done. So let's get our 4th base page. And for the front of page 4, 3, we're going to have, let's see, we're going to want to put the flaps on first. So we're going to have 2 flaps that are going to be on the left-hand side of the page and then a large pocket. So the 2 flaps are cut to 5 3/4 by 6 1/4. Make sure I got my score lines right. You're going to score on the 5 3/4 inch side at 1/2 inch. Go ahead and fold on your score lines and burnish both flaps. So you're going to add your glue on the inside of the flap for one of them, and go ahead and tuck that in at the very top on the left-hand side of the base page. So you're going to put it inside the pocket, and it's going to go right there at the top. Now open that flap up, and then take your other flap and put the glue on the outside of the flap this time, and stick it down right on top of the base page, lining it up with the bottom. Okay. Now, for the base page pocket that's going to go at the bottom of the page, cut that at 5 1/2 inches by 8 3/8 inch. Score on the 5 1/2 inch side at 1/2 inch, and then on the 8 3/8 inch side at 1/2 inch on each end, and then miter your corners. And fold on your score lines and burnish. Whoops. Almost messed up that fold. I'm getting glue everywhere. Then I'm going to line it up on the right hand side of the page because I cut it obviously just slightly smaller to make room for those flaps on the left hand side. For some reason the craft cardstock seems like it takes just a little bit longer to adhere to the page than the black to really burnish it really well. And that's it for this one. These are kind of freestanding flaps. I don't glue them. I don't use a magnet or anything. I just leave them as is. That's it for that page, so turn it over. This is the back of page 4 that we're doing now. And it has, I used a swing tab to keep these flaps closed. So what we'll do is we'll have a pocket on the base page, and then we'll do, which we can go ahead and add. Let's add the pocket first. It's 5 inches by 8.5 inches. Score on the 5-inch side at 1/2 inch, and then on the 8.5 inch side at 1/2 inch on each end. I'm going to miter my corners and go ahead, and I'm going to add this on the right hand side of the base page. It's going to be a side pocket. Lots of pockets in this one. Lots of large pockets in this one. Okay, and I've just added it. I have my opening over here on this side, on the left hand side. And again, just making sure to burnish it, make sure it's stuck down before I move on to the next step. So we're going to have 2 flaps. The first one is 7.5 by 6 inches and score on the 6-inch side at 1/2 inch. Fold on your score line and burnish. This flap, I'm going to miter the corners and add my glue to the inside of the flap and stick it in to the pocket of the base page on the left hand side. Right there. It's really odd that it's not wanting to stick for some reason. My flap was moving around before I ever got it burnished in place. I haven't used craft cardstock in quite a while, so I'm always using black. The other flap that's going to go directly on top of this one is 5.5 by 7.5 inches. Score on the 5.5 inch side at 1/2 inch. Fold on your score line and burnish. And you're just going to add this right on top. This album is super easy to make, really, even though it uses a lot of cardstock and pattern paper, but it comes out super cute. Okay, I'm just going to burnish this down. And you can choose to either do a ribbon tie here to keep these flaps closed, or magnets, but I didn't find that very efficient. I used a swing tab. So that's it for page 4. Let's move on to page 5. So grab another base page. The front of page 5 is, I used a swing tab on this one as well. So we have a large flap on the left hand side, so let's go ahead and cut that at 6.5 inches by 7.5 inches. Score on the 6.5 inch side at 1/2 inch. I'm folding on my score line, burnishing, and I'm going to miter because I'm going to put this flap into the base page pocket. So my glue is going to go on the inside. Just lining it up. Burnish it down. And then my next flap's going to go on the right hand side. It's a smaller flap, and you're going to cut that one to 5 3/4 by 6 1/4. Score on the 5 3/4 inch side at 1/2 inch. I'm going to fold on my score line and burnish. And I'm going to go ahead and add my glue on the inside of this one as well and tuck it into the pocket. And I'm just going to try to line it up as best I can to get it in the middle of the page. So I have to turn my page around all different directions to line it up. And then the final element for this page, the glue's getting a little gunk on the top. Clean that off. You're going to open up these two flaps, and there's a large belly band on this page. I cut to 5 inches by 8 1/2 inches. Score on the 8 1/2 inch side at 1/2 inch on each end. Fold on your score line and burnish. And I added mine further to the left-hand side of the page. So I'm going to do that again. And it's almost, there's about a 1/2 inch here between this flap and where the belly band begins. And that's it. This flap closes and that flap closes, and we're done with that page. So turn it over and let's do the back of page 5, which is, what is it? So this must be page 6 front. So back of page 5 is just a large flap. So you're going to cut this to 6 1/2 inches by 7 1/2 inches. Score on the 6 1/2 inch side at 1/2 inch. Fold on your score line and burnish. Miter your corners. And put your glue on the inside of the flap. And it's going to go on the left-hand side of the base page, on the inside of the pocket. Okay, and that's it for that page, just one large flap. So let's put that to the side and go with our last page. Our last page has quite a few features on it. Let's grab our last base page and let's do the first large flap. You're going to cut this at 7 1/2 inches by 8 inches. Score on the 8 inch side at 1/2 inch. I'm going to go ahead and miter these, and then I'm going to fold. And I'm going to add my glue on the inside of this flap. And stick it in to the base page on the right hand side, making sure I'm not going over the score line, which is a lot of times why I fold it down and then burnish it, because it kind of ensures it doesn't go over. Okay, now there's also a side pocket on this flap. Where is it? Here it is. Cut your side pocket to 6 inches by 8 1/2 inches. Score on the 6 inch side at 1/2 inch and on the 8 1/2 inch side at 1/2 inch on each end. And miter those corners. Fold on your score lines and burnish. And this is going to be added on the left-hand side of that flap we just put on, with the opening towards the right. Okay, now you're going to open that flap up. And on the inside, you're going to do two flaps. The first one, we're going to start with the larger one. It's going to be 6.5 inches by 7.5 inches. Score on the 6.5 inch side at 1/2 inch. I'm going to go ahead and miter these corners because we're going to stick it inside the base page pocket on the left-hand side. I'm going to add my glue to the inside. This gives you a really large spread for photos. And then we're going to add the other flap on top of this flap we just added. So this one is 5 3/4 by 6 1/4. Score on the 5 3/4 inch side at 1/2 inch. Fold on your score line and burnish. And then go ahead and add your glue and stick that right down on top. You're going to line it up in the center of the flap you just added, right on top of it. Now it looks really plain right now, but once you start decorating your edges, or even if you round the corners, it really makes a big difference. And that's it. I did use a magnet on this one. So flip this over, and this is our last page before we go to the album cover, which does have a couple of a pocket, and then the back cover has some stuff on it. This one, excuse me. So let's add the large pocket first. So large pocket's cut at 6 inches by 8.5 inches. Score on the 6 inch side at 1/2 inch, and on the 8.5 inch side at 1/2 inch on each end. I'm going to miter my corners here. And go ahead and fold on my score lines and burnish. And I'm going to add this to the bottom of the base page. I like lots of glue. Okay, here we go. Alright, and then we're going to add a flap at the very top of the page. That one's cut to 6.5 inches by 7.5 inches, and you're going to score on the 6.5 inch side at 1/2 inch. Fold on your score line and burnish. And you're going to add it right there to the top. And then the other pocket that I have cut is a pocket that you're going to have to wait to add it after you add some of your pattern paper. So what I did is when you flip this up, I added another pocket. You're going to cut this one to 5 inches by 6.5 inches. Score on the 5 inch side at 1/2 inch, and on the 6.5 inch side at 1/2 inch on each end. And then miter your corners. And then fold on your score lines and burnish. And for now, you're just going to stick this inside the pocket here until you get ready to attach it. But it goes right here in the center of this page. So you have the small pocket here and then the larger pocket here. And so you have to mat this pocket before you can add this one. And then I attached my magnet to this pocket and this flap to keep it closed. Okay? And that's it for the pages, guys. So let's move on to the front and back cover features. Okay guys, so I created and filmed how to do the front and back covers on this album, but I didn't like how it turned out. So I'm not going to make another album again, but I am going to go through it with you again, because I'd messed up and I didn't want y'all to get messed up along the way as well. So to start, you're going to do your front cover pocket, and you're going to want to cut two of these because we're going to do one on the front and one on the back at 9 1/4 by 5 1/2. You're going to score on the 5 1/2 inch side at 1/2 inch, and on the 9 1/4 inch side at 1/2 inch on each end, and this is what you will get. Okay, so I've mitered my corners, I folded on my score lines in burnish. So you're just going to add your glue, of course, to the back, and you're going to place this pocket all the way to the left of the front cover. Okay, this will give you a nice border right here between where your cover ends and your spine begins. Okay, so that's going to go right there. So that's super easy. For the back cover, this is where I messed up a little bit because I wanted to add a closure to this little booklet that we're going to create, but I added my pocket before I added the closure, so not a good idea. So what I'm going to do instead is I've cut a piece of black cardstock that's going to act like the base of my album. So we're going to pretend this is the cover, the back cover of the album. And I have these other pieces, and I'm going to run through it with you again, if I can speak correctly. So let's start out with a piece cut. This is for the booklet at 6 1/8 by 7 1/2, and you're going to score on the 6 1/8 of an inch side at 1/2 inch, and then also at 5/8 of an inch, and you're going to have a little gusset right there. So you're going to fold on the 1/2 inch score line first, and then fold on the 5/8 of an inch score line. So this is what you should get, this little lip right here. So there's your hinge, and there's the flap. So what I'm going to do is you're going to add your glue just to the 1/2 inch part. So let me show you what that looks like. I'm going to put my glue right here. And I'm going to place this piece, if this were my cover, I'm going to place it right up to the first score line, and I'm going to line it up all the way at the bottom of the cover. Okay? So can you see where that is? So when it folds, we're going to have this little gap that lines up with the edge of the cover. Okay? So go ahead and open that up, and now we can go ahead and place our pocket since we have this piece on. So take that pocket, cut to the same size as the front one at 5 1/2 by 9 1/4. Go ahead and add your glue to it, and we're going to stick it down. Whoops. And we're going to line it up right next to the score line right here is how we're going to do that. And with the bottom of the page. Got a little bit too much glue there. I'm going to go ahead and burnish it. So if you can see, I have my little gusset here, and then the pocket is lined up right with that first score line. So when you fold this down, you shouldn't have any issues with it folding at all. Okay, now open it up, or leave it open. Now we're going to add the booklet part right here. So this part is cut to 5 7/8 by 7 1/2. Score on the 5 7/8 of an inch side at 1/2 inch. So fold on your score line and burnish. Go ahead and put glue on the outside of the hinge. And line this up with the right side of your page. And press down. So what you should have now is you should have some gaps here, and that's okay. We want those gaps. So you're going to have your 1/8 of an inch gap that we created, like our little gusset, and then you're going to have a little over 1/8 of an inch gap here. And that's fine. I was shooting for 1/8 of an inch, but it ended up being a little bit more, so that's okay. So here's our little booklet. So open your booklet up, and let's add our photo mat flaps to the inside. These, cut 2 of these at 4 3/4 by 6 1/4, and score on the 4 3/4 inch side at 1/2 inch. So go ahead and fold on your score lines and burnish for both of these. Oops. And then what you're going to do is, sorry, let me look and see again how I did mine. Yeah, that's what I did. Okay. Just want to make sure I do it right this time. I don't want to film this again. So add glue to the outside of the hinge. And then place it right up against the score line, and you can line it up with the very top of the page. Okay. And burnish it down. So it'll be attached to this flap here. And the other photo mat, we're going to attach it to this flap. So again, we're going to add our glue here. And then I'm going to add this one at the bottom. And I'm going to line it up right, almost right next to the score line, a little bit away from it. And I'll show you what that looks like if you can't see. So here's my 2 flaps here. And there's how I did mine. See, I have a good gap. It's not huge, but it's enough to where when they fold together, everything folds in. You're going to have to take your bone folder and just give this another good crease, and everything will lay more flat. But it's a little booklet, and it opens here. You have a photo mat here, one here, and then another space for a photo here. Now we are going to add the closure to this, and this is where I messed up last time. The closure is going to be cut to 3 inches by 2 3/8 of an inch. Score on the 3 inch side at 1/2 inch and at 5/8 of an inch. So that way we have a little gusset again, okay? Now I'm going to add this. I'm going to add glue to the inside of this flap right here. And I'm going to add it, and I'm just guessing here, about to the middle of the page, okay? If you want to measure it, you can, but I like to just eyeball it. So there it is, and you're just going to add it right up to the first score line. So when you fold it over, you have that little gusset right there, okay? And then you'll add a magnet right here. So what I did to keep all this together is I put a magnet here and here to keep this closed, and then I also put a magnet over here so that when this shut, it all stuck down together. Okay? Now we're going to add our final pocket, and you're going to cut that to 6 1/2 by 4 1/2, and you're going to score on the 6 1/2 inch side at 1/2 inch on each end, and then on the 4 1/2 inch side at 1/2 inch. I've already mitered my corners, so I'm going to fold on my score lines and burnish. And then I'm just going to add that right to the bottom of that flap. The back, technically it's the back of the booklet, I guess. And this will be the last part for our back cover. Okay. And you can just burnish this down. And that's it. So you have your pocket here. Flip it over, and then you have your little booklet with your magnet, and then a pocket here. So really cute. I think it turns out really cute. So that's all for the page construction and everything. And let me just go over with you quickly about the spine. If you want to do your spine like I did with the seam binding right here, what I did, where's my ruler? So I cut a piece to cover my spine at 3.5 inches by 7 3/4 of an inch. So the back piece behind this piece right here is 3.5 by 7 3/4. And then I cut 2 more pieces. So these smaller ones here are 1 inch by 7 3/4. So I put a 1/2 of an inch of score tape down the middle. I mean, not down the middle, I'm sorry. Lined up to the left hand side on this one, and then on the right hand side on this one. And then when I did my eyelets, I put my ruler, and let me show you. This might be easier to show you this way. So I have my ruler here, and I put it on here. I lined it up. Is that lined up? At 3/4 of an inch. So the top of the paper should be at the 3/4 of an inch mark on my Tim Holtz ruler, okay? So then what I started to do is at the 1/2 inch mark, I did my first little, I did little dots, and then going forward, I did 3/4 of an inch. So every 3/4 of an inch, I put a little dot, and then when I was done making my dots, I went and I punched all my holes and added my eyelets. That's it. It's super simple. So then I removed the score tape backing and adhered both of these pieces to the base design paper. Okay. And then I threaded it like a shoelace. So I just added my seam binding and went back and forth, and I tied a ribbon up here. I tied it in a knot and then tied it in a bow, and that's it. It was really easy. So that's how you do the corset binding if that's what you want. I know other people have used like paper punches to get the right holes and to make it a little decorative. I really liked the eyelets because it's really strong, and it was super easy to thread the seam binding through the eyelets. You could also use thinner ribbon if you like, or whatever kind of ribbon you like actually. Because the seam binding is thin, it works out well. Even though it's a little fatter, it's really easy to do. So that's all for that. I can't think of any other measurements excuse me, to give you guys. I think that's it. All of my photo mats are 4 1/4 by 6 1/4. I think I mentioned that this one is cut to 6.5 by 9. And I scored on the 9-inch side at 4.5 is how I did that. I can't remember if I told you guys that or not because it's been a week since I filmed the first part of this video, so I forget what I've told you guys. So that's all that I've got for you. If I missed anything or you have any questions, give me a shout out and let me know. So thanks for watching.